In the summer of 1999, 5 children disappeared from a church picnic in the town of Hollow Creek, West Virginia. No suspects, no remains, not a single trace. For 20 years, the town kept its silence until the creek ran dry for the first time in half a century, and something finally surfaced. What began as an investigation into a forgotten cold case soon uncovered a ritual older than the town itself and a secret that refuses to stay buried. Subscribe for more true crime investigations and the secrets that time forgot. The first time Aaron Walsh saw Hollow Creek. It reminded her of a photograph faded by too much sun. The Appalachian hills leaned close together, and the trees seemed to whisper above the narrow road that wound between them. It was a town that kept its secrets deep, buried in the shale, the church walls, and the long, cold water of the creek itself. The official record said 5 children had vanished from a church picnic on a humid August afternoon in 1999. They'd been playing near the old iron bridge, less than a mile from the churchyard. Dozens of people saw them that day. None saw them leave. The search party scoured miles of forest, draining ponds, tearing apart barns. Nothing. It became a ghost story that grew teeth with every retelling. Aaron remembered the case vividly. She'd been 12 when it happened, old enough to feel the fear bleeding through the TV news coverage. Her father, a police sergeant, had worked the search that summer and came home smelling of river mud and failure. When he died in 2019, Aaron found the Hollow Creek file among his things. Yellowed maps, half-torn photos, and one note in his handwriting. They knew. She didn't know who they were, but she knew one thing. He hadn't meant strangers. So when True South magazine greenlit her proposal to revisit long, cold Appalachian disappearances, Hollow Creek was first on her list. She drove in on a wet March morning 20 years and 2 months after the 5th child vanished. The town hadn't changed much. Same gas station, same diner, same boarded-up storefronts, the same church steeple stabbing at the grey sky. The locals said the creek had run dry that winter for the first time in 50 years. The old bridge stood exposed above a cracked bed of stone and weeds. And beneath it, someone had found bones. The call came from Sheriff Miles Denton. "We can't confirm anything yet," he said, voice brittle over the line. "But you might want to see this." Aaron's hand tightened around her pen. Human, a pause, then looks that way. Outside, the rain began again, tapping like fingers against her windshield. Aaron parked her rental car at the edge of the bridge, the tires crunching over gravel. The sky hung low, the color of dirty tin, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. Sheriff Denton waited near the yellow tape, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, and carried the kind of weariness that comes from years of seeing the same faces and the same mistakes. "Dr. Walsh," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Didn't expect you this fast." "Your call said you found bones," Aaron replied, flashing her press badge. "I don't usually take chances with rumors." Denton nodded toward the creek bed. "Come see for yourself." The bed lay exposed like the inside of a wound. The drought had stripped away the last trickle of water, leaving the bones of the land bare. A small team from the state crime lab crouched near the base of the bridge, brushing dirt away from something pale and fragile, half buried in clay. Aaron crouched beside them, squinting. They weren't complete remains, just a small radius and part of a jaw. But even half hidden in mud, there was no mistaking their shape. "Children?" she asked quietly. The lead technician glanced up. "We can't say yet. They're small, but the creek could have worn them down." Aaron felt a chill crawl up her spine. The sound of the wind whistled through the bridge's iron ribs, like a whisper carried from the past. Denton folded his arms. "We'll send it to Charleston for analysis." "But if it's one of the Hollow Creek 5, he trailed off, letting the thought hang. "People here don't like old ghosts being stirred." "They've had 20 years to make peace," Aaron said. He gave her a look. "People don't make peace, Dr. Walsh. They build walls." That evening, Aaron checked into the Hollow Creek Motor Inn, a squat building with flickering neon and floral curtains that smelled of mildew. She spent hours reviewing the case file she'd copied from her father's box. 5 missing children, ages 8 to 11. The names came back like a forgotten hymn. Molly Keene, 10, Eli and Grace Parker, Twins, 8, Benji Holt. 9, Tessa Rayner. 11 all vanished on August 14, 1999. The police had interviewed everyone at the picnic, including parents, teachers, and Pastor Rayner, Tessa's father. He'd been leading the afternoon prayer when the children disappeared. No witnesses, no screams, no tracks, just an empty patch of woods behind the church and 5 bicycles left leaning against a fence. Aaron flipped through the reports again and found something odd. Her father had circled one name 3 times in red ink. Samuel Keene, Molly's older brother, age 14 at the time. In the margin, her father had written, he saw something. Won't say what. She closed the file slowly. The motel's old air conditioner rattled like distant thunder. Tomorrow she would find Samuel Keene. The next morning broke cold and colorless. Hollow Creek's main street was a collection of memories pretending to be a town. A grocery with a sagging roof. A diner with a single neon open sign blinking like a dying heartbeat. Aaron found Samuel working behind the counter of that diner, wiping tables with mechanical precision. He was in his mid-30s now with tired eyes and a limp that made him favor his right leg. "Coffee?" he asked when she sat down. "Sure," she said, studying him. "You're Samuel Keene." He froze for half a heartbeat. "You a repo?" "RTR. I'm an investigator," Aaron replied softly. "I'm writing about what happened here in 1999. He set the pot down carefully, avoiding her gaze. "Then you're wasting your time. They're gone. End of story. Bones were found in the creek yesterday," she said. That made him look up. Something flickered in his eyes. Fear, grief, maybe both. Whose? They don't know yet. He sat down opposite her, the chair creaking. "You think it's them?" "I think the truth's been buried too long," Aaron said. "Your name came up in my father's notes. Your father was Denton's partner." He said, "I remember him. He wanted to dig up the whole town." "Did you see something that day, Samuel?" He hesitated, jaw tight. "I saw what I wasn't supposed to, and they made sure I never said a word." "Who's they?" Samuel's eyes darted to the diner window where the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. "You really don't want to know?" Aaron leaned in. "Try me." He looked back at her, voice barely a whisper. "The church." It started with the church. The diner emptied as morning slid toward noon, leaving only the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the smell of fried batter. Samuel Keene sat opposite Aaron, his coffee untouched, his eyes moving restlessly toward the street. He spoke again, only after a long silence. "You ever been to Hollow Creek Baptist?" Aaron shook her head. "Then you've never met Pastor Renea." The name was familiar from the file. Tessa's father, the man leading prayer the day the children vanished. Samuel rubbed his palms together. After they disappeared, he preached every Sunday about forgiveness. Said the devil walked among us, but he was the only one who never looked for them. Not once. "You're saying he was involved?" "I'm saying the church ran deep here. Too deep." He lowered his voice. "My mama used to say Hollow Creek was built on a trade. Faith for silence. Folks needed jobs and the church gave them work. When the pastor said pray, they prayed. When he said don't ask questions, they didn't." Aaron took notes quietly, letting the words settle. "Why didn't you speak up then?" Samuel gave a bitter laugh. "You think anyone would have listened to a kid? My father worked maintenance for that church. After the disappearances, he got drunk one night and said he'd found something buried near the old baptism pool. Next morning, he was gone. They called it suicide. You don't believe that?" He looked at her then, eyes glassy. "He was scared, not suicidal. They found him in the creek, same as the kids." A bell jingled above the diner door. An elderly woman stepped in for coffee and Samuel fell silent, jaw tightening. When she left, he stood. "If you're going up there, be careful. Pastor Renea's dead, but his son's still around. Took over the congregation." "What's his name?" "Daniel Renea. Folks call him Reverend now." "Where can I find him?" Samuel hesitated. He still lives in the rectory behind the church. But you didn't hear it from me. Aaron nodded, leaving a few dollars on the counter. Out. Side, the fog was lifting, revealing the hollowed valley that gave the town its name. The church stood on a ridge above the road, its white steeple stabbing through the thinning mist like a blade. She drove up slowly. The parking lot was cracked and lined with weeds, but the bell tower was freshly painted. Someone cared about appearances. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and candle smoke. A young woman was arranging hymnals on the pews. She looked up when Aaron entered. Service isn't until Sunday. I'm looking for Reverend Rayner. He's in the study. Aaron followed her gaze to a half-open door near the pulpit. She knocked softly. A man's voice answered, calm and measured. Come in. Reverend Daniel Rayner was younger than she expected. Late 30s, maybe clean-cut, composed with pale blue eyes that carried a stillness too deliberate to be natural. Dr. Aaron Walsh, she said, offering her hand. I'm investigating the Hollow Creek disappearances for True South magazine. His handshake was brief. I assumed someone would come eventually. The bones under the bridge. Yes. Yes, he gestured for her to sit. I was 8 when it happened. My sister Tessa was one of them. The sheriff's office asked my father the same questions for years. He never had answers. Neither do I. Your father led the prayer during the picnic. A faint smile. You've done your homework. I'm trying to understand how 5 children vanished within a crowd of 50 adults. Faith can blind people, he said quietly. Everyone's eyes were closed. Aaron studied him. Do you think your father knew more than he said? He paused, then folded his hands. My father was many things, devout, stern, sometimes cruel, but not a liar. After the disappearances, he changed, locked himself in his study for weeks. Then he stopped preaching and took sick. He died a year later of what? Heart failure. Though the coroner said it looked more like exhaustion. He'd lost all color, all will. I think guilt can kill a man as cleanly as any disease. Aaron took out her notebook. Samuel Keene believes your father hid something near the baptism pool. Rayner's eyes hardened slightly. Samuel Keene sees shadows everywhere. His family never forgave the church for what happened. You can't imagine the pressure my father was under. People accusing, grieving, desperate for someone to blame. I imagine losing a child yourself made it worse. He nodded slowly. Yes. And when the investigation ended, everyone needed a villain. The sheriff, the pastor, even each other. But Hollow Creek runs on secrets, Dr. Walsh. If you dig too deep, you'll drown like the rest. There was no anger in his tone, only resignation. Outside, the wind carried the faint toll of the church bell. Aaron stood. Thank you for your time, Reverend. He walked her to the door, polite as ever. If you're staying in town, come by for Sunday service. People talk more freely after a sermon. I might do that. As she stepped outside, she noticed the baptism pool bay. In the church, a concrete basin fed by a thin stream from the hill. It was half empty, lined with algae. But something about the pattern of dark stains along its edge made her stomach tighten. She crouched to examine them. Faint drag marks leading toward a patch of disturbed earth beneath a willow. The sound of gravel crunched behind her. She turned. The young woman from inside the church stood at the edge of the path, her hands clasped. You shouldn't be back here, she said softly. I'm just looking, Aaron replied. I'm with I know who you are. The woman's voice trembled. If you value your life, don't trust him. Reverend Rayner. The woman nodded once, her eyes glistening. He's not his father's ghost. He's worse. Before Aaron could respond, the woman turned and hurried away toward the rectory, disappearing through the fog. Aaron remained kneeling by the pool, her pulse quickening. Somewhere beneath the surface of this town lay a truth that refused to stay buried. And now the ground was starting to shift. The first drops of rain began to fall again, dotting the muddy earth like fingerprints. That night, Hollow Creek was quiet in the way only small towns could be. Silence like a lid screwed tight over something that wanted to scream. Rain drifted in thin veils across the churchyard as Aaron parked beneath the slope, her headlights off. The only light came from the Recre's kitchen window, where a single bulb glowed a faint amber against the dark. She pulled her coat tighter and made her way up the hill toward the baptism pool. The willow tree shivered under the drizzle, its branches trailing along the water's edge. The disturbed patch of ground she'd seen earlier was still there, slick with mud. She crouched and brushed away a layer of wet leaves. The earth gave under her fingers, soft, newly turned. Her heart picked up. She turned on her phone's flashlight and aimed it at the soil. A scrap of fabric protruded from the dirt. A faded piece of floral cotton worn thin but unmistakably patterned like a child's dress. Aaron froze. She remembered the case photos. Tessa Rayner's pink floral dress. She swallowed hard and started her recorder. "This is Dr. Aaron Walsh," she whispered. March 11, 2020. Potential evidence site behind Hollow Creek Baptist Church. The beam of her flashlight caught movement. A figure at the edge of the trees. She turned sharply. "Who's there?" No answer, just the sound of branches dripping. She waited, pulse hammering, then back toward the path. The figure didn't follow. After a moment, she slipped her phone back into her pocket and snapped a few photos of the site before heading down toward her car. Her shoes slid on the slick hill, and she reached the gravel drive, breath quick and shallow. The mist had thickened, muting every sound except the rhythmic tap of rain. She opened the driver's door and froze again. A folded paper was tucked under her windshield wiper. She unfolded it carefully under the beam of her phone. One sentence. Written in neat black ink. "You can't save what's already been baptized." She looked around the parking lot, empty. The road stretched dark in both directions. Aaron climbed into the car, locked the doors, and sat there trembling for a full minute before starting the engine. The next morning, the motel room felt colder than before. Her notebook lay open on the desk beside the coffee pot, filled with scrolled notes from the night. The fabric scrap, sealed in a plastic evidence bag, sat beside it. She stared at it while sipping coffee gone bitter from reheating. Whoever had left that note had known she'd go up there, known what she'd find. She called Sheriff Denton. He arrived 20 minutes later, hat pulled low, eyes wary. "You should have told me before going up there," he said, examining the evidence bag through the plastic. "I wasn't expecting to find anything," she said. It looked freshly dug. He frowned. "If this is from one of the victims, we'll need to reopen the case officially." "You realize what that means?" "Backlash," Aaron said. "From the town, from the church. From everyone," he exhaled. "People here got used to their ghosts staying quiet." "I didn't come here to let them sleep," she said. Denton gave her a long look, then nodded. "I'll take this to the lab. Don't go back there alone again." When he left, the motel room felt smaller. She sat by the window, watching rain drip from the overhang. Across the parking lot, the curtains of the room opposite hers shifted slightly. Someone was watching. Aaron turned off her lamp and moved away from the window, heart thutuing. A shape, maybe a man, stood faintly silhouetted behind those curtains for several seconds before the fabric fell still. She waited another minute, then grabbed her bag and recorder. She needed air and answers. She drove to the far edge of town where the old Hollow Creek Cemetery crouched against the hillside. According to the files, it was the oldest site in the county, dating back to the 1800s. The missing children's names weren't there, but the Rayner family plot was. She parked under a dripping oak and walked between rows of leaning stones until she found it. A tall cross flanked by smaller headstones. Pastor Nathaniel Renea, 1951 to 2000. Beside it, Tessa Renea, 1988 to 1999. Missing. Someone had carved the word found into the marble beneath Tessa's name. The edges of the carving were fresh, the grooves still white from exposed stone. Aaron's throat went dry. Behind her, footsteps on wet leaves. She turned quickly. The young woman from the church stood a few paces away, hood pulled over her head, eyes darting. "I didn't mean to scare you," the woman whispered. "You didn't," Aaron lied. "I was hoping to find you." The woman hesitated. My name's Leah. I cleaned the church. Why warn me about Reverend Rayner? Leah bit her lip. Because I've seen what he does when people ask the wrong questions. What do you mean? She glanced over her shoulder toward the trees. He has gatherings late at night. Says it's prayer, but it's not. They go down to the creek. They light candles and sing without words. Who's they? Old families mostly. The same ones who lost someone back then. They say it's to keep the lost children's souls at peace. But I've heard things, Dr. Walsh. Voices under the bridge and sometimes screaming. The rain intensified, whispering through the grass. Aaron's recorder blinked red in her pocket. Why stay if you're afraid? Leah's eyes filled with tears. Because leaving doesn't help. The ones who leave, something always brings them back. Thunder rumbled over the hills. Aaron took a cautious step closer. Leah, do you know who left this? She held out the folded note. Leah stared at it for a long time. That's his handwriting, she whispered. Reverend Rayner's. He keeps a journal. I've seen it where in his father's old office. He locks the drawer, but she hesitated. I have a spare key. Aaron's pulse quickened. Can you get me in? Leah nodded weakly. Not now. Tomorrow night. After choir practice, lightning flickered across the sky, briefly illuminating the rows of graves. Aaron turned to look, and when she turned back, Leah was already gone, swallowed by the mist between the headstones. Aaron stood alone in the rain, gripping the note until the ink began to bleed in her hand. Behind her, somewhere deep in the valley, the church bell tolled once, not for mass, for warning. The following night, Hollow Creek seemed to hold its breath. The rain had stopped, leaving a thin silver mist clinging to the trees. Aaron waited in her car outside the church parking lot. Engine off, watching for any sign of movement near the rectory. The building's windows glowed faintly, warm light behind lace curtains. She checked her watch. 9:42 p.m. Leah had said choir practice ended at 10 o'clock. Aaron's pulse ticked in rhythm with the clock. Her recorder rested in her coat pocket, ready. When the side door of the church opened, Aaron saw Leah step out, carrying a stack of hymnals. She glanced over her shoulder, then hurried toward the rectory gate. Aaron followed at a distance until they met beneath the willow. You're sure no one's inside? Aaron whispered. Leah shook her head. Reverend left half an hour ago. He's with the Dentons. Family dinner. He won't be back until midnight. Aaron nodded. Then we move fast. They crossed the yard. Their footsteps muffled by damp grass. The back door of the rectory creaked softly as Leah unlocked it. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of old books and cedar polish. A grandfather clock ticked somewhere in the hall. The study was small, lined with dark wood shelves filled with religious texts and framed photographs. A single desk lamp illuminated the room, its yellow light falling over papers, an open Bible, and a framed photo of Pastor Nathaniel Renier with his family. Tessa's smile stared out from the image, frozen in the moment before she vanished. Leah went to the desk and knelt, pulling a ring of keys from her pocket. Key. P.S. it here, she murmured, unlocking the bottom drawer. Inside was a small leather-bound journal, edges worn soft from handling. Leah hesitated before passing it to Aaron. Don't keep it long. If he notices it's gone, I'll return it, Aaron promised. The first page carried the name Nathaniel Renier, dated 1998 to 1999. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Aaron flipped carefully through the pages, her breath slowing as she read. December the 3rd, 1998. The children are the future, pure, unspoiled. To cleanse the town's sins, we must begin again in faith. April 9th, 1999. The elders agreed. The offering will come in August when the waters run high. Only then will Hollow Creek be redeemed. Aaron felt her stomach turn. Offering? She whispered. Leah leaned over her shoulder. What does he mean? Aaron turned another page. August 14th, 1999. The chosen 5 are ready. They know nothing of sacrifice, only that the water will wash them clean. The Lord forgives what the law cannot. Her hand trembled. The last entry was dated the day after the disappearances. The water carried them home. The creek runs red and holy, but the voice in the willow says it is not enough. Aaron shut the book, pulse roaring in her ears. It was ritual, she said. Not accident. He sacrificed them. Leah's face had gone pale. Then why did Daniel keep this? Because he's continuing it, Aaron said softly. The gatherings you mentioned, they're reenactments. From the hall came a sudden creak. Both women froze. Leah whispered, he's not supposed to be back yet. Aaron stuffed the journal into her bag and Leah closed the drawer quickly. Footsteps moved past the doorway. The faint smell of pipe smoke drifted in. They slipped behind the curtains, holding their breath. The door opened. Reverend Rayner stepped inside, humming under his breath. His shadow stretched across the room. He moved to the desk, paused, then reached into the drawer. Aaron's heart hammered. If he noticed the missing journal, it was over. But instead he took a pen and a small notebook from the top and began writing. His voice was barely audible. Lord, let your servants remain unseen that the unworthy may pass like dust. Aaron's skin prickled. The words sounded practiced, ritualistic. He closed the notebook, replaced it, and left. They waited until the echo of his footsteps faded before emerging. Leah's hands were shaking. He wasn't supposed to be here, she whispered. Go home, Aaron said. Lock your door. I'll handle the rest. Leah nodded and slipped out the back, disappearing into the mist. Aaron waited a full minute before leaving, clutching the journal close to her chest. Back in the motel, she laid the journal open under the desk lamp, transcribing each entry by hand. The further she read, the darker it became. References to blood baptism, atonement through drowning, and the covenant under the bridge. Her father's old notes came to mind. They knew the town elders, the church board, perhaps even the sheriff at the time. She turned another page and stopped. August 15, 1999. One survived. The boy with the scar. He ran before the water took him. The others will not speak, but the voice in the willow knows his name. The boy with the scar. Aaron's mind raced. Could it be Samuel Keene? She reached for her phone and dialed his number from the diner receipt he'd given her. No answer. Straight to voicemail. Outside, a car engine idled faintly. She looked through the curtain. Headlights parked across the road, pointed toward her room. Her pulse quickened. She turned off the lamp, crouched below the window, and listened. The engine cut. The driver's door opened, closed. Footsteps approached. She grabbed her recorder. March 12th, she whispered. Unidentified vehicle outside motel. Possible surveillance. A knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate raps. She stayed silent. Another knock, then a voice. Dr. Walsh. Sheriff Denton. She exhaled shakily, unlocked the door. Denton stood there, hat dripping from rain. Sorry to spook you, he said. We got the lab report on that fabric scrap. What did it say? It's human blood. Typo. Matches one of the victim's parents. Means it was handled by someone close. He studied her face. You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have, she murmured, setting the journal on the table. The pastor kept records. He called it an offering. Denton stared at the open pages, jaw tightening. If this is real, we're standing on a crime scene 2 decades old, or one that never ended, Aaron said. He looked at her sharply. What do you mean? She pushed the journal toward him and pointed to the last entry. One survived. The boy with the scar. Denton's expression shifted. Samuel Keene. Aaron nodded. He's missing again. Denton rubbed his temples. Christ. She closed the notebook slowly. The creek took 5. Maybe it's ready to take one more. Morning broke over Hollow Creek like a bruise. Purple clouds pressing low against the hills. Sunlight struggling to seep through. Sheriff Denton's cruiser rolled along the narrow road out toward the timber line, the wipers scraping a slow rhythm. Aaron sat beside him, the pastor's journal resting on her lap, a knot tightening in her chest. Samuel Keene's cabin stood at the far edge of the county, just beyond the tree line. According to Denton, he'd been living alone for years, doing odd jobs and hunting in the woods. He'd refused most interviews when the case resurfaced. Aaron wondered if the fear that had kept him silent was finally catching up. Samuel's not a bad kid, Denton said quietly. He saw something he shouldn't have. Spent half his life trying to forget. Aaron watched the road ahead where fog thickened between the trees. If he really did survive what happened, then he's the last living witness. Denton nodded grimly. Let's just hope he's still breathing. They turned onto a dirt road, tires crunching over gravel. The cabin appeared ahead. Small wood darkened by rain, smoke rising weakly from the chim. Nay. A hound barked somewhere out back. Denton parked and they stepped out. The air smelled of wet pine and smoke. Aaron felt the weight of the forest pressing in, every sound muffled by mist. Denton called out, "Samuel, Sheriff Denton, here. We just want to talk." No answer. He knocked on the door. Silence. Then a faint scuffle inside. Aaron exchanged a glance with him. Denton's hand hovered near his holster as the door opened a crack. Samuel Keene peered out, gaunt, eyes ringed with sleepless shadows, a pale scar running from his temple to his jaw. "You shouldn't be here," he said hoarsely. "Samuel," Denton said gently. "This is Dr. Aaron Walsh. She's helping with the investigation." Samuel's gaze flicked to her. Then to the journal in her hand. His face went white. "You found it? You knew about this?" Aaron asked softly. "I told him to burn it." Samuel whispered, but he said the words were sacred. His voice shook. "You shouldn't have read them." He tried to close the door, but Denton pressed his palm against it. "Sam, we need to know what happened that night." The man stared past them into the trees. "It wasn't night," he said finally. "It was morning. The creek was red from rain. They said it was holy water." Aaron stepped closer. "The offering? You were one of the 5. Samuel nodded, eyes distant. "We thought it was a game. Reverend Renea said we were special, that God had chosen us to wash away sin. They took us to the creek. We were supposed to hold hands and pray. But then the singing started." His voice cracked. "It wasn't church music. It was something else." "What happened to the others?" Aaron asked. Samuel swallowed. "They went into the water. The current took them. I slipped and hit a rock. That's how I got the scar. When I woke up, it was night again. They were gone. All of them." And Pastor Renea was standing on the bank with his hands covered in mud. Denton's jaw tightened. "Did you tell anyone?" "I tried," Samuel said, his voice trembling. "My parents didn't believe me. They said I was confused, that the pastor was a good man. After the funerals, empty coffins, they sent me to live with my uncle." He gave a bitter laugh. "You can't fight the church in Hollow Creek." Aaron opened the journal and turned it toward him. This last entry, "One survived, the boy with the scar." "Was it written about you?" He nodded slowly. "He came to me years later. Said the offering had failed because I lived. Said the creek wanted balance. He made me promise never to talk or it would come for me, too." Aaron's stomach turned. The creek wanted balance. Samuel's eyes met hers. "You think I'm crazy? Everyone does. But listen, there's something in that water. I still hear it when it rains. It whispers names. Last night it called mine." Denton rubbed his forehead. "Sam, you need help." Samuel stepped forward suddenly, gripping Aaron's wrist. "His back." He hissed. "Raina, he's doing it again." "What do you mean?" Aaron whispered. "They're gathering by the old bridge tomorrow night. The same way Th. EY did before. I saw the candles. I heard the singing. Aaron felt her pulse quicken. We can stop them, but we need proof. Samuel shook his head violently. You don't understand. Proof doesn't matter. The water doesn't care about proof. He released her hand and backed toward the door. You should leave before it finds you. Samuel, she began, but he slammed the door. The lock clicked. Denton exhaled. His cracked, he muttered. Too many ghosts. Maybe, Aaron said quietly. Or maybe he's the only one still seeing the truth. They walked back toward the car. The fog had thickened into a wall of grey. Somewhere in the trees, a branch snapped. Both turned sharply, scanning the shadows. Dear, Denton muttered, though his hand stayed near his gun. Aaron glanced back at the cabin. A figure watched from the window. Samuel, half hidden behind the curtain, but it wasn't just fear on his face. It was pity. That evening, back in town, Aaron spread her notes across the motel bed. 5 names, 5 children, 1 survivor, 1 ritual that never truly ended. She marked the words Old Bridge in red pen and underlined it twice. If the church was planning another gathering, this was their chance. But she couldn't go in blind. She needed to know what the offering meant, why the Rainers believed blood could purify a town. She opened the journal again. Near the end of the book, after the final entry, there were faint pencil marks, almost invisible unless held under light. She tilted the page, squinting. Under the willow, the covenant remains. Blood binds the flock. Her throat went dry. Beneath the willow, the same tree by the baptism pool. Aaron grabbed her coat and keys. By the time she reached the church grounds, the sky was nearly black. The willow stood tall and silent, branches stirring in a faint wind. The disturbed earth from before looked different now, smooth as if someone had reared what she'd found. She knelt, brushing aside the wet leaves again. Her fingers hit something solid just beneath the surface. She scraped away the mud and uncovered a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in rotted cloth, lay a tarnished brass crucifix and a child's locket. Aaron wiped it clean. Inside the locket was a tiny photo of a girl with bright eyes and a chipped front tooth. Tessa Rayner. Her breath caught. The locket was warm against her palm, impossibly warm. Behind her, footsteps approached through the wet grass. Dr. Walsh came, a voice smooth and calm. You're trespassing on sacred ground. She turned slowly. Reverend Daniel Renea stood in the rain, his hands clasped before him, expression unreadable. The light from the church glowed behind him, haloing his figure in pale gold. I think you have something that belongs to me, he said softly. Aaron rose, the locket clutched tight. This belonged to Tessa. He smiled faintly. Tessa belongs to God. Then why was she buried here? His smile didn't falter. Because not all baptisms are for the living. For a moment neither moved. Then the church bell tolled once, low, heavy, echoing through the mist. When Aaron looked back toward the tree, the box was gone. The next night brought a darkness so complete that even the moon seemed to hesitate over Hollow Creek. The air was heavy with a smell of rain and river mud, the kind that clung to boots and memory alike. Aaron sat inside Sheriff Denton's cruiser on the ridge overlooking the old bridge. Below them, the creek wound through the valley like a black ribbon, its surface faintly glimmering in the half-light. Denton lowered his binoculars and muttered. There, between the cedars, Aaron leaned forward. Through the veil of mist, she saw them. 6 figures in long coats, each carrying a lantern. They moved silently toward the water's edge, where the creek curved beneath the bridge. Layla had been right. The congregation had returned. They shouldn't be out here, Denton said under his breath, trespassing after dark. They are not just trespassing, Aaron whispered. They're repeating the ritual. The figures gathered in a semicircle near the base of the willow trees that lined the creek. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward, lifting something wrapped in cloth. Aaron recognized him even before the light caught his face. Reverend Daniel Rayner. He unwrapped the object, a wooden cross darkened by age. The same cross she'd found fragments of in the pastor's journal sketches. Denton adjusted his holster. We go down there now. Wait, Aaron said quickly. If we interrupt them, we lose any chance of seeing what they're really doing. Just give me 5 minutes. Denton hesitated, then nodded. 5? No more. Aaron slipped from the car and moved silently through the trees, rain whispering across the leaves. She crouched behind a fallen log about 20 yards from the group, recording everything. The lanterns flickered, casting wavering halos of light over the creek. Rayna's voice carried across the water, low, rhythmic. 16 years have passed since the first offering. Tonight, the covenant is renewed. The blood has dried and the water thirsts again. The others repeated after him in a low chant. Aaron's heart pounded. She recognized some of their faces, the mayor's wife, a local teacher, even one of the deputies. Rayna continued, the lost have returned to the soil, but one was spared, and through him, the sin endures. He raised a hand toward the darkness of the woods, and then another figure stepped into the lantern light. Samuel Keene. Aaron's breath caught. His face was blank, almost serene, eyes reflecting the flame. He walked toward Rayna slowly, as if pulled by something unseen. No, Aaron whispered, rising slightly. Rhea placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. The scarred one brings the balance, he inned. Through his surrender, the waters will rest. Samuel knelt. Rayna drew a small silver blade from his coat. The others began humming, a deep wordless sound that made Aaron's skin crawl. She took a step forward, heart hammering. Stop, she called OU. T before she could stop herself. Step away from him. Every head turned. The humming died. Rayna's gaze found her across the darkness. Dr. Walsh, he said evenly. You shouldn't witness this. Denton appeared behind her, flashlight blazing. Put the knife down, Reverend. He barked. Rayna didn't move. Sheriff Denton, I thought you were a man of faith. Faith doesn't excuse murder. The congregation began to whisper among themselves, voices trembling. Samuel looked from Aaron to the creek, then back at Renea. You said it would end, he murmured. It will, Rayna said softly. Through you. He lifted the knife. A gunshot split the air. The blade flew from Rayna's hand and landed in the mud. Denton advanced. Gun raised. Everyone down, but Renea didn't flinch. His eyes flicked toward the creek, and for the first time, Aaron saw fear cross his face. The water was moving fast. It churned violently as though stirred from beneath. The lantern flames wavered, shadows bending across the bank. A sound rose from the creek, not a splash or a rush, but a voice. Dozens of them whispering in unison. Aaron's mind reeled. The voices weren't chanting words. They were names. Tessa, Jamie, Marie, Peter, Eli, the 5 children. Denton backed away, muttering. What in God's name? Rayna shouted above the rising roar. You see, the covenant remains. They demand completion. Samuel stumbled backward, clutching his head. Make it stop. He screamed. Please make it stop. Aaron ran toward him, grabbing his arm. Sam, look at me. You're not theirs. You survived. But his eyes were glassy, unfocused. He stared into the rowing water, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. They're calling me home. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the creek, and for a heartbeat, Aaron saw them. 5 pale shapes beneath the surface, small hands reaching upward through the current. Then darkness again. Danton, she shouted. Get him away from the water. The sheriff lunged forward, but Renea was faster. He grabbed Samuel by the shoulders, dragging him toward the edge. It's not death, he cried. It's redemption. Let him go, Aaron screamed. Denton fired again, the bullet striking Rayna's leg. The Reverend fell, releasing Samuel, who staggered free. The congregation scattered, some screaming, others running into the trees. The creek quieted as suddenly as it had risen, the water smoothing back into mirror-like stillness. Only the lanterns flickered on the bank, their flames trembling. Rayna lay on the ground, gasping, blood spreading beneath him. Aaron knelt beside him, breathless. "Why?" she demanded. "Why the children?" His eyes fluttered open, calm despite the pain. "To save them," he whispered. "To save all of us. The sins of Hollow Creek go back generations. The water remembers. It always remembers." "What are you talking about?" He smiled faintly. "You'll see. When the river runs high again." Then his head lulled to the side and his breathing stopped. Denton lowered his weapon. Eyes wide. "Jesus!" Aaron looked toward the creek one last time. The water was utterly still now, reflecting only the faint glow of the lanterns and her own pale face staring back. Somewhere far downstream, a single church bell tolled. The following morning, the official report listed it as a botched religious gathering. No mention of the chanting, no mention of the voices in the water. Rayner's body was taken to the county morgue. The remaining congregants claimed ignorance, insisting they thought it was only a reenactment service. Samuel Keene disappeared before sunrise. When Aaron went back to the motel, her recorder was waiting on the desk, still running. She hadn't turned it on. She pressed play. At first, just static. Then a whisper, faint, but clear, like breath against her ear. "You can't save what's already been baptized." Morning sunlight crept over Hollow Creek like a reluctant confession, gilding the fog that still clung to the valley. The storm had rinsed the hills clean. But the town felt unwashed, its silence thick, its people keeping their eyes low as Aaron walked through Main Street toward the courthouse. Word of the accident at the bridge had already spread. The diner was closed. The bell over the grocery door still. The only sound came from the river below, swollen again from the night's rain. Inside the sheriff's office, Denton sat behind his desk, a paper cup of coffee trembling slightly in his hand. The bulletin board behind him was crowded with photos from the old investigation. Faces of the 5 missing children, faded with age. Aaron laid her recorder on the desk. "You listened to it yet?" He shook his head. "Couldn't bring myself to. Folks around here already think the devil talks through static." She pressed play. The hiss filled the small room, then faintly. "You can't save what's already been baptized." Denton's face went gray. "That's Rayner's voice." "No," Aaron said quietly. "I compared it to the sermon tapes in the church archive. It's not him. It's a child's." The sheriff rubbed his temples. "So, what are we dealing with here, Doc? A curse? A copycat? You tell me." "I think the truth's older than the church." Aaron said Rayner wasn't the first to believe the creek could wash away sin. He inherited that idea. Maybe from his father. Maybe from the town itself. He frowned. The town. Hollow Creek was founded on a floodplain. I checked old census records this morning. There was a settlement here before the Civil War. Different name, Hollow Ford. And in 1863, it disappeared. Flood wiped it off the map. Dozens drowned. Denton stared. And the survivors rebuilt upstream. They called it Hollow Creek. But in every generation since, there's been a drowning. Always children. She slid a photocopy across the desk. An 1894 newspaper clipping. 3 local youths lost to sudden rise and creek. Townsfolk hold midnight vigil. The pattern repeats every 20 years. Denton's coffee went untouched. "You think Rayner knew?" "I think he believed he was PR. Eventing the next one. A sacrifice to keep the water calm." He leaned back, exhaling. "God help us." Aaron hesitated. "There's more. The old mining maps show something under the valley. A cave system. The creek runs right through it. The entrance collapsed decades ago, but there's another access point beneath the church." Denton raised an eyebrow. "You're saying there's an underground river?" "More than that," she said, "a place they called the Chamber of Atonement. I found the term in Rayner's notes." He stood, reaching for his hat. "You're not going down there alone." They reached the church by late afternoon. The sky had turned the color of tarnished brass. Leah met them at the back gate, pale and trembling. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "The congregation's been coming by all day cleaning up. They'll notice you." Denton flashed his badge. "Then we'll be quick. Show us the way to the cellar." She led them through the sacristy to a narrow staircase descending beneath the sanctuary. The air grew damp, thick with the smell of earth and mildew. At the bottom stood a heavy wooden door reinforced with rusted iron. "It's been sealed for years," Leia said. "The Reverend kept the key in his office." Aaron tried the handle. It turned easily. The lock had already been broken. A narrow tunnel stretched ahead. Torch sconces black with soot. Water dripped steadily somewhere in the dark. They followed the path downward until the ground leveled and opened into a cavern lit by shafts of afternoon light filtering through cracks in the stone. Aaron stopped short. The chamber's floor was lined with shallow basins carved into the rock. Pools of stagnant water reflecting their movements like mirrors. Symbols covered the walls, circles interlocked with crosses worn smooth by time. "What in the hell?" Denton muttered. "It's older than the church," Aaron whispered. "Maybe older than the town." In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, its surface etched with names. Some were nearly erased by age, but Aaron recognized 5 of them. Molly Keene, Grace Parker, Eli Parker, Benji Hall, Tessa Rayner. She brushed a trembling hand across the carvings. "They brought the children here." Leia made a choking sound. "We need to leave." But something else caught Aaron's eye. A new inscription at the base of the altar. Fresh. The chisel mark still sharp. "Samuel Keene. 2020, her breath hitched. He's alive. Or someone wants us to think." So Denton knelt beside her. "We were at his cabin this morning. There was no sign." A splash cut him off. One of the pools rippled though no stone had fallen. Then another. And another closer. "Back upstairs," Denton said quickly. They turned, but the tunnel behind them had gone dark. The flashlight beam wavered across wet stone and vanished into blackness. From the pools came a soft, rhythmic sound. Drip, drip, drip. It grew faster, louder until the air vibrated with it. Then the whispering began. It wasn't language, not exactly, just breath and murmur. Dozens of tiny voices echoing off the stone. Aaron pressed a hand to her ear, but the sound was inside her head now, forming words from memory rather than speech. "We remember. We remember the flood. We remember the children." Leia screamed, clutching her temples. Denton pulled her toward the passage, firing his gun once into the darkness. The shot cracked through the chamber and was swallowed whole. The water surged upward from the basins, flooding across the floor, icy against Aaron's ankles. In the shifting light, faces appeared beneath the surface. Small, pale, half-formed. "Run!" Denton shouted. They scrambled up the incline, slipping on wet stone. The whispering followed, rising into a roar that shook the walls. At last, they burst through the cellar door into the sanctuary, gasping for air. Behind them, the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the pews. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Only their breathing filled the room. Finally, Denton said, "We seal that damn place and never go back." Aaron stared at the floorboards beneath her feet, still hearing the voices echoing in the dark. "Denton," she whispered. "If the names were carved for every offering, then the next flood isn't a warning. It's a schedule." He frowned. "What are you saying?" She looked toward the stained glass window where rain began again, streaking the colored glass like tears. "I'm saying it's about to happen again." Thunder shuddered through the hills all night, the kind that made the earth vibrate underfoot. By dawn, the sky had turned a sickly green-gray, clouds boiling low over Hollow Creek. The storm the town had whispered about for weeks had finally come. Aaron sat in the sheriff's cruiser outside the church, watching rain beat against the windshield. She hadn't slept. The sound of water had followed her through every dream, whispering through the seams of memory. Denton climbed in, radio crackling. Bridge roads closed, creeks already over the banks down by the mill. If it keeps rising, we'll have half the valley under. Aaron stared out at the soaked fields. That's what they were waiting for, The flood. He nodded grimly. If that chamber fills, it'll take the church with it. Not just the church, Aaron said. The town's built on the same riverbed. The chamber's a drain. Denton looked at her. You want to go down there again, don't you? She didn't answer. The thought had haunted her all night. The fresh carving of Samuel's name. The whisper that had called her by voice, not her own. If he was alive, that chamber was the only place he could be. Denton sighed. Then we'd better move before the water gets there first. The church loomed like a black shape against the storm. Wind tore through the trees, bending the willow beside the baptism pool until its branches swept the flooded ground. The cellar door stood half open, water spilling up the steps like a slow-breathing lung. They waited down, flashlights slicing through the dark. The tunnel walls wept rainwater, the air taste of iron and rot. When they reached the chamber, it was half submerged. The pools had merged into one, a restless black mirror rising inch by inch. The altar stood like an island in the center. Aaron waited forward, boots slipping on smooth stone. Samuel, she called, her voice echoing. For a long moment, there was only the drip of water. Then a voice answered from the shadows. Here, she swung her light toward it. Samuel stood waist-deep in the far corner, soaked to the bone, his eyes vacant. You came, he said. What are you doing here? Aaron asked. He looked at the water. Listening. Denton stepped closer, hand on his gun. You need to come with us, son. It's not safe. Samuel smiled faintly. It's never safe in Hollow Creek. Aaron reached for him. Sam, please. He turned his gaze to her, and for an instant she saw the boy he must have been. The same wide, frightened eyes from the missing person photo. They're not angry anymore, he whispered. They just want to be remembered. Lightning flashed, illuminating the chamber. For a heartbeat, Aaron saw shapes beneath the rising water, small forms drifting upward like pale ribbons. The 5 children hands lean. The thunderclap that followed shook dust from the ceiling. Water surged another foot. Time to go, Denton shouted. But Samuel didn't move. If I leave, it starts again. Someone has to stay. Aaron splashed toward him, grabbing his sleeve. You survived for a reason. Don't throw that away. He shook his head. I was spared to open the gate. You were sent to close it. Before she could speak, the floor trembled. A fissure split the altar from end to end. A column of water burst through, violent and cold, knocking her backward. The flashlight flew from her hand, spinning across the current. Denton caught her arm, dragging her toward the stairs. Move! Samuel remained where he was, chest deep now, face calm. Tell them, he called. Tell them the river keeps its promises. Then the torrent swallowed him. Aaron screamed his name, but the roar drowned everything. Denton pulled her up the steps as water surged behind them. They burst through the cellar door just as the current exploded from below, lifting pews like driftwood. Outside the ground had become a river. The baptism pool overflowed, the willow bending low as if in mourning. They stumbled through the rain toward higher ground. Behind them, the church groaned, its steeple cracked, timbers snapping like bones. The bell tolled once, then the roof collapsed in a wave of spray and thunder. For a moment, the sound of rushing water filled the valley. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rain eased. Hours later, dawn broke through thinning clouds. Emergency crews swarmed what was left of the church, now half buried in mud and debris. Denton stood near the edge of the crater, soaked and exhausted. Aaron joined him, blanket draped around her shoulders. They'll call it a flash flood, he said. Nobody will mention what was under there. She nodded numbly. They'll rebuild. They always do. He looked at her. You think he's gone? Aaron glanced toward the muddy water pooling at the bottom of the crater. The surface rippled once faintly, though there was no wind. I don't know, she said. But I think Hollow Creek finally took what it wanted. The sheriff's radio crackled behind them. Road to the bridge is washed out. We found a body snagged in the debris. Male, early 30s. Scar on the face. Aaron closed her eyes. Samuel. Denton touched her shoulder gently. You did what you could. She opened her recorder and pressed play. Static again. Then beneath it, a voice she hadn't heard before. Soft, childlike. Thank you. Tears blurred her vision. She clicked the device off and slipped it into her pocket. Come on, Denton said quietly. Let's get you out of the rain. As they walked toward the waiting ambulance, the morning sun broke through the clouds, lighting the valley in fragile gold. For the first time, the creek lay still, silent as if holding its breath. And far beneath that calm surface, where the old chamber now slept under stone and silt, something moved once more. A ripple tracing the outline of a child's hand before fading into stillness. By the third day after the flood, Hollow Creek smelled of wet earth and smoke. Half the valley was a patchwork of broken fences and drowned fields. The church had collapsed entirely. Only the steeple jutted from the mud like a gravestone. Aaron walked the perimeter with a borrowed camera, taking photos for her article, though she no longer knew who she was writing for. She hadn't slept properly since the night the church went under. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw the water, saw Samuel's hand slip beneath it. Sheriff Denton stood near the wreck of the bridge talking with a state trooper. He turned as she approached. County's sending an engineer team, he said. They'll decide whether to divert the creek. Might finally tame this thing. Aaron looked down at the brown water surging under the temporary scaffolding. You can't tame memory, she said quietly. He gave her a tired smile. You sound like my grandmother. She was probably right, too. The trooper called him away. Aaron crouched near the water line, dipping her hand into the current. It was cold, faster than it should have been. Something tugged faintly at her fingers, a rhythm pulsing from beneath. She withdrew her hand, heart beating faster. The creek had changed course. She could feel it. That evening, she sat alone in the motel room, the hum of the neon sign outside flickering red across the walls. Her laptop screen glowed with an unfinished sentence. Hollow Creek was built on a flood plain, and every generation, the water came for what it was owed. She pushed the computer aside and reached for her father's old file box. There was one folder she hadn't opened yet. The earliest records, yellow and brittle with age. Inside were copies of deeds, land surveys, and a page torn from an old ledger. At the top, Hollow Ford Mining Company, 1859. Names were listed, laborious, supervisors, and at the bottom, written in faded ink. Foreman Nathaniel Renaer, Sr. Her breath caught. The same family name more than a century earlier. A note in her father's handwriting was scrolled beside it. Mine flood. 47 dead. Children trapped. Town rebuilt on higher ground. She read it twice before whispering, it started here. She clicked on her phone's light and compared the old mining maps to a modern one. The old shafts ran directly beneath the current creek. One entrance marked X sat near the ridge above the mill. If the town was born from the bones of the drowned, maybe the Rainers had been keeping a promise ever since. She reached Denton by radio just before midnight. I found something. There's another entrance to the underground chamber, older than the church cellar. It's the mineshaft under the ridge. He sounded wary. You really think that's smart, Doc? We just watched a building get eaten by that place. I think it's the only way to end it, she said. Silence crackled for a beat. Then I'll meet you there. The ridge road twisted through forest slick with rain. Aaron parked at the trailhead and started down on a foot, flashlight beam cutting through mist. The air was heavy with the smell of minerals and moss. Halfway down the slope, she saw the old entrance, a gaping black wound in the hillside, rimmed with rusted rails. Water trickled from within, dark as ink. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The tunnel sloped downward, the sound of dripping echoing endlessly. Her light found handprints on the rock, tiny, child-sized, pressed into ancient clay. She traced one with her fingertips. It was cold as stone. Dr. Walsh, she turned, startled. Denton's silhouette appeared in the beam, his coat soaked. Couldn't let you do this alone, he said. Then let's see what they were protecting. They followed the main shaft until it opened into a wide chamber supported by wooden beams blackened with age. In the center, a pit of still water glimmered faintly. Something metallic jutted from the mud. A cross almost identical to the one Raina had held. Aaron knelt, brushing the surface. This was the original offering site. The miners' children, they used this as a baptism pit. Denton ran his light across the walls. Faded symbols covered them. The same circles and crosses from the church basement. They were praying for rescue, he said, or for forgiveness. A tremor rippled through the ground, followed by the distant crack of thunder. Drops of water fell from the ceiling faster now. "We need to go," Denton said. But Aaron wasn't listening. Something glimmered just beyond the pit, half buried. She reached for it and pulled free a rusted lantern, still holding shards of glass. Inside, something rattled. A small brass locket identical to Tessa Rayner's. She opened it. The photograph inside was different. An older girl, hair tied with a ribbon. Beneath the photo, scratched into the M. Etel were words nearly lost to corrosion. "Remember the flood." The tremor came again, stronger. Water gushed from cracks in the walls. The mine groaned. "Aaron!" Denton grabbed her arm. Now they ran, boots slipping on slick stone. The tunnel behind them collapsed with a roar as water surged upward, chasing them like a living thing. They burst into the night just as the hillside buckled, sending a geyser of muddy water into the sky. They tumbled to the ground, coughing, soaked. The rain had stopped, but the air still thrashing water far below. Aaron lay back, gasping, clutching the locket. It's all connected. The mine, the church, the creek. It's one system, one memory. Denton stared toward the valley where the faint glow of the town flickered through the mist. Then what happens when it remembers everything? She turned the locket over in her hand. On the back, newly visible in the lamplight, was a scratched date, 2020. She closed her fingers around it. "We find out," she said, "before the water does." By morning, the valley wore a hush that felt wrong, like the pause between thunder and the next strike. Mist hung over Hollow Creek, blurring rooftops into smudged silhouettes. The flood waters had begun to recede, but the air still smelled of clay, silt, and something older, like memory itself breaking loose. Aaron and Denton sat in the sheriff's office, boots caked with dried mud. A generator hummed somewhere behind the building, powering the only light in town. On the desk lay the brass locket, still damp, and a pile of soap papers Denton had salvaged from the church's storage vault before the collapse. He flipped through them slowly. "These go back to the 1880s, after the mine flood you found in your father's files. Names match old property deeds." Aaron leaned over his shoulder. "The Rayner family again. Nathaniel Sr., his son Thomas, and then Pastor Nathaniel Jr., that's our modern Rayner's great-grandfather," Denton whistled softly. "So, the family's been running the church since the town was dirt." More than that, Aaron pointed to a ledger entry dated 1886. "The covenant renewed." Beneath it, signatures of townspeople, including the sheriff, the mayor, the mill owner. Every generation, a resigning. "It wasn't just religion," she murmured. "It was a contract," Denton frowned. "For what?" She looked at the locket, glinting on the desk. "To keep the water sleeping." They spent the afternoon cross-referencing the names with modern records. Nearly every surname still existed in Hollow Creek. Sometimes changed, sometimes married into new lines, but always here. Aaron traced one finger down the list. "Look at this. Barrett, Loomis, Garner, all sitting on the current town council, even your predecessor, Sheriff Harlan Denton." "My uncle," he admitted quietly. She met his eyes. "You think he knew?" He hesitated. "He used to say the creek never takes what doesn't belong to it. I thought it was just old talk." The generator flickered, plunging them briefly into dimness. "Arrow." N.'s gaze went to the window. Outside, a figure stood in the rain's haze, watching the station. A man in a black coat, face shadowed beneath a hood. When Denton turned to look, the figure was gone. That night, unable to rest, Aaron walked the main street. The power outage had left everything wrapped in darkness. The flood had stripped the paint from storefronts, exposing the old brick beneath like bone under skin. She stopped before the Rayner house on the hill, the only building untouched by water. Light glowed behind its lace curtains. Through the rain-warped glass, she saw movement. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You're not supposed to dig this deep. TR." She stared at it until the light in the window blinked out. Morning brought clearer skies and more unease. Denton found her nursing a coffee at the diner, her hair still damp. "Rayner's been missing since the flood," he said without preamble. "Search teams can't find him." Aaron's cup froze halfway to her lips. "You think he's dead?" "I think he's hiding. And I think you're on his list now." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, still frames from her father's old microfilm reels. They showed a gathering of men outside the first church in 1920. In the center, a child stood beside Pastor Thomas Renea, her small hand clasped in his. "The first offering after the mine flood," Aaron said. "They replaced the lost children with others as if repeating the ritual would keep the rest safe." Denton looked ill. "That's not faith. That's fear. Generations built this town on it." He rubbed a hand across his jaw. "If that's true, what's next?" She hesitated, then opened her notebook to a final page written there, copied from the back of the ledger they'd found. "When the river runs red again, the covenant must be renewed by a blood of the eldest." "Red Creek Festival," she whispered. "It's this weekend." By afternoon, preparations had already begun. Down by the fairgrounds, townsfolk erected tents and hung crimson banners that flapped in the wind. Children chased each other through puddles, laughing, oblivious. Aaron walked among them. Camera slung over her shoulder. No one met her eyes for long. She saw it now. The undercurrent of unease. How conversation stopped when she passed. How smiles thinned. Denton caught up to her near the main stage. "You seeing this?" She nodded. "Every family on that ledger is here." At the center of the ground stood a massive wooden platform over the creek, freshly rebuilt since the flood. Carved into the new beams were faint circular markings. The same design from the old chamber. "Looks like a stage," Denton said. "It's an altar," Aaron replied. They heard laughter behind them. Mayor Garner approached, flanked by two councilmen. "Well, if it isn't our local celebrities," he said, voice too bright. "You'll both be guests of honor at the festival, I hope." "Mayor," Denton said carefully. "That structure out there, who authorized it?" Garner smiled thinly. "Tradition. The town was founded on the creek, Sheriff. We honor it every year. You, of all people, should understand that." Something in his tone chilled Aaron. "Enjoy the celebration," Garner added before walking off. When he was gone, Denton muttered, "He's quoting my uncle word for word." That evening, they drove to the old cemetery overlooking the valley. The graves of the miners' children lay there, their stones eroded nearly flat. Aaron knelt, brushing away moss from one inscription. "Eleanor Renea, aged 9 years." She whispered, "They offered their own first." Denton crouched beside her. "What are you thinking?" "That the covenant isn't superstition. It's a pact, and it renews with the flood." She looked toward the glowing lights of the fairgrounds below. "If they believe the water demands another offering, they'll choose someone." "Who?" "The eldest bloodline." She turned to him, face pale. "The last Rayner. Pastor Nathaniel." She shook her head slowly. "Or his son. I saw a photograph in the house years ago. Boy, no older than 10. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The creek's roar echoed faintly up the hill. Denton stood. "Then we stopped them before they try." Aaron rose too, gripping the locket before Hollow Creek remembers how to kill. By dusk, Hollow Creek pulsed with color and noise. String lights flickered over the town square, their reflections dancing on puddles still left from the storm. Generators hummed, the smell of fried dough and wet pine mingling in the cooling air. From a distance, it looked almost normal. People laughing, children darting between booths, music drifting from the loudspeakers. But under it all was something else, an expectancy, an almost reverent hush beneath the noise, like the town was holding its breath. Aaron stood near the edge of the fairgrounds, camera in hand, pretending to take photographs. Beside her, Denton adjusted his radio, scanning through static. "Deputies covering the north side," he said quietly. "If anyone heads toward that stage after sunset, we'll see it." Aaron nodded. "If we're right, it won't happen until the ceremony begins." "What ceremony?" Denton asked, but his voice already carried the weight of knowing. She gestured to the massive wooden platform built above the creek. Its beams gleamed wetly under the lights, carved with faint sigils. A crimson cloth covered the central table, and a silver bowl rested upon it. The symbolism was too precise to be coincidence. From the loudspeakers, the mayor's voice boomed. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the annual Red Creek Festival, a celebration of survival, of community, and of the waters that have sustained us for generations." Applause rippled through the crowd. Aaron watched faces, smiling, trusting, unaware. Some clapped too long, too hard. Members of the council, their eyes shining with an odd intensity. Denton leaned close. "You think they even know what they're doing?" "Maybe not consciously," Aaron said. "But rituals survive long after belief fades. They're habits of fee." The music swelled as the ceremony began. Reverend Daniel Renea took the stage, his black coat flaring in the wind. He looked older, gar as if the flood had hollowed him out. His eye scanned the crowd with distant calm. "My friends," he began, voice carrying easily through the speakers. "This year we have endured trials. The water rose and we lost what we loved. But we are still here." He paused, resting a hand on the silver bowl. "Our ancestors taught us that the creek gives and the creek takes. Tonight, we honor that balance." Aaron's pulse quickened, she whispered. "It's happening." Denton's hand went to his holster. "Not if we stop it." A hush fell as two councilmen approached the stage, guiding a small figure between them. A boy, 10, maybe 11, blonde hair, pale eyes, trembling beneath the weight of a ceremonial cloak. "Dear God," Denton breathed. Aaron stepped forward, camera forgotten. "That's his son," she whispered. "Eli Renea." The boy looked terrified. His gaze swept the crowd, searching for escape. His father rested a hand on his shoulder and smiled sadly, almost tenderly. "Tonight," Pastor Renea said, "we renew the covenant our fathers made to protect Hollow Creek from the flood that claimed them through remembrance, through offering." He raised a knife, antique, curved, etched with the same circles that marked the altar beams. Gasps rippled through the spectators. Some stepped back, others crossed themselves instinctively. Denton shouted, "Rhea, drop it!" The crowd erupted into confusion. Screams, the scramble of feet, the sudden wail of the sheriff's radio. Rayner turned sharply toward the noise, his face a mask of sorrow rather than fear. "It has to be done," he said, his voice breaking. "Or the water will come again." Aaron ran forward, pushing through the crush of people. "It already came," she cried. "You can't stop nature by spilling blood. You only feed it." Rayner hesitated, knife trembling. For a heartbeat, the boy twisted free and ran, stumbling across the slick platform. Aaron reached him, pulling him close. "Get off the stage!" Denton barked, drawing his weapon. Lightning split the sky, white and blinding. The wind howled down the valley, carrying the sound of rushing water, the creek surging higher, faster. Rayner looked up as if seeing something the others couldn't. "It's too late," he whispered. "They're already here." The first wave hit the platform supports with a thunderous crack. Water exploded upward, drenching the crowd. People screamed and scattered. The stage tilted violently, splitting down the middle. Aaron clutched Eli and jumped, landing hard in the mud below as the wooden beams collapsed behind them. Denton was there in seconds, hauling them toward higher ground. Behind them, Rayner still stood on what remained of the platform, arms raised to the storm. "Forgive me," he shouted to the darkness. Then the structure gave way completely, plunging him into the black water. When the rain stopped, the festival grounds were unrecognizable. Tents flattened. Food stalls washed into the creek. the air thick with the smell of oil and earth. Emergency lights flickered in the distance. Aaron sat beneath an overturned trailer, Eli wrapped in her coat. He shivered silently, staring at nothing. Denton joined her, soaked and pale. "They found him," he said quietly. About half a mile downriver, the current broke his neck. Aaron closed her eyes. He thought he was saving them. Maybe he did. She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Denton gestured toward the creek. The flood stopped rising the moment he went under. Like something was satisfied. She wanted to argue to reject the thought, but the truth of it hung between them like mist. In the distance, the townsfolk gathered in stunned silence, watching the water recede into its channel. The crimson banners, torn and soaked, floated past like blooded ribbons. Eli spoke for the first time, voice small. He said, "I'd have to finish it one day." Aaron took his hand gently. "No," she said. "You'll break it instead." Thunder grumbled far off in the hills, retreating at last. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth and cedar. Denton exhaled. "So what now?" Aaron stared at the dark water flowing past its surface calm once more. "Now," she said, "we tell the story and we make sure the town remembers what it's been worshipping later as dawn spread pale light over Hollow Creek." The church bell somehow recovered from the wreckage told once. The sound echoed through the valley like a warning or perhaps a farewell morning after the festival rose grey and still as if the town itself was holding its breath. The floodwaters had finally pulled back, leaving a slick film of silt and wreckage over everything. Overturned tents, shattered glass, pieces of the altar wedged in the mud. The air buzzed faintly with flies and the low hum of emergency generators. Aaron walked the creek's edge, boots sinking in the sludge. The smell of decay clung to the air. Sheriff Denton trailed behind her, notebook in hand, jotting down what details the deputies shouted across the site. Body recovered, structure compromised, cause of death, probable drowning. It was official language for an event that would never fit a report. Aaron crouched where the water had been deepest. Something metallic glinted beneath a mat of reeds. She reached down and pulled free the silver bowl from the altar. Dented, cracked clean down the middle, its inside stained red-brown. She didn't know whether it was blood or silt. "The covenant's broken," she said quietly. Denton nodded, watching her. "And the town's looking for someone to blame." "Doesn't matter," she replied. "The truth's buried too deep to blame anyone living." He glanced up the hill toward the Rayner house. "You think it's over?" Aaron stared at the slow current. "When a story's been told long enough, it doesn't end. It just changes its name." By noon, the news trucks had arrived. Satellite dishes rising from vans like steel. Lies. Reporters spoke of tragic accidents, festival panic, and centuries-old superstition. No one mentioned the symbols carved into the beams or the boy in the cloak. Aaron refused interviews. She spent the afternoon in her motel room piecing together her father's notes with the photographs from the mine in the church. Her recorder sat on the table, red light blinking. "This is Dr. Aaron Walsh. Day 5 after the Hollow Creek flood." Her voice was hoarse but steady. "The covenant appears to have been a generational pact originating with the Rayner family following the 1859 mine disaster. The miners' children drowned in an attempt to save them from rising water. Survivors mistook the tragedy for a divine warning. Over time, the act was ritualized. Blood for safety, innocence for order. Each generation renewed it during flood years. The belief endured because it worked. The town always survived." She paused, listening to the rain beginning again against the window. "Last night, Pastor Nathaniel Renea attempted to renew the pact using his own son. The ritual failed or succeeded, depending on how you define salvation. The creek receded. The water is quiet." She stopped recording. The silence after her own words felt heavy, unfinished. That evening, a knock at her door broke the quiet. She opened it to find Eli Renea standing there, his small frame dwarfed by Denton's coat draped around him. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. She let him. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped around a folded piece of paper. "They're sending me to stay with relatives," he said. "Out of state." "That's good," Aaron said. A fresh start. He shook his head. I don't want to forget. If I forget, it starts again. Aaron sat beside him. Then remember, but differently. Not as something to fear. He hesitated, then handed her the paper. It was a drawing, childlike, done in pencil. It showed the creek, the church, and beneath them, shapes of faces in the water. In the corner, a small stick figure stood on the bank holding a candle. That's you, he said. You found them. Aaron felt tears blur her vision. No, she said gently. We found each other. When night fell, she couldn't sleep. Something called her back to the creek. She followed the narrow path behind the motel until she reached the bend where the current ran deep and slow. Fireflies drifted above the surface, their reflections like tiny souls flickering in the dark. She knelt at the water's edge, the silver bowl in her lap. It's over now, she whispered. You can rest. The surface rippled, though no wind stirred. A faint glow shimmered beneath. Blue-white pulsing like breath. Then she heard it. A chorus of whispers, soft and distant, overlapping like rain on glass. Remember us? Aaron swallowed hard. I will. The glow dimmed. The water stilled. For the first time since she'd arrived in Hollow Creek, the night was silent. Morning after the festival rose grey and still, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The flow. Oddwaters had finally pulled back, leaving a slick film of silt and wreckage over everything. Overturned tents, shattered glass, pieces of the altar wedged in the mud. The air buzzed faintly with flies and the low hum of emergency generators. Aaron walked the creek's edge, boots sinking in the sludge. The smell of decay clung to the air. Sheriff Denton trailed behind her, notebook in hand, jotting down what details the deputies shouted across the site. Body recovered, structure compromised, cause of death, probable drowning. It was official language for an event that would never fit a report. Aaron crouched where the water had been deepest. Something metallic glinted beneath a mat of reeds. She reached down and pulled free the silver bowl from the altar, dented, cracked clean down the middle, its inside stained red-brown. She didn't know whether it was blood or silt. The covenant's broken, she said quietly. Denton nodded, watching her. And the town's looking for someone to blame. Doesn't matter, she replied. The truth's buried too deep to blame anyone living. He glanced up the hill toward the Rayner house. You think it's over? Aaron stared at the slow current. When a story's been told long enough, it doesn't end. It just changes its name. By noon, the news trucks had arrived. Satellite dishes rising from vans like steel lyres. Reporters spoke of tragic accidents, festival panic, and centuries-old superstition. No one mentioned the symbols carved into the beams or the boy in the cloak. Aaron refused interviews. She spent the afternoon in her motel room piecing together her father's notes with the photographs from the mine in the church. Her recorder sat on the table, red light blinking. This is Dr. Aaron Walsh. Day 5 after the Hollow Creek flood. Her voice was but steady. The covenant appears to have been a generational pact originating with the Rayner family following the 1859 mine disaster. The miners' children drowned in an attempt to save them from rising water. Survivors mistook the tragedy for a divine warning. Over time, the act was ritualized. Blood for safety, innocence for order. Each generation renewed it during flood years. The belief endured because it worked. The town always survived. She paused, listening to the rain beginning again against the window. Last night, Pastor Nathaniel Rayner attempted to renew the pact using his own son. The ritual failed or succeeded, depending on how you define salvation. The creek receded. The water is quiet. She stopped recording. The silence after her own words felt heavy, unfinished. That evening, a knock at her door broke the quiet. She opened it to find Eli Rayner standing there, his small frame dwarfed by Denton's coat draped around him. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. She let him. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped around a folded piece of paper. "They're sending me to stay with relatives," he said. "Out of state." "That's good," Aaron said. "A fresh start." He shook his head. "I don't want to forget. If I forget, it starts again. Aaron sat beside him. Then remember, but differently. Not as something to fear. He hesitated, then handed her the paper. It was a drawing, childlike, done in pencil. It showed the creek, the church, and beneath them shapes of faces in the water. In the corner, a small stick figure stood on the bank holding a candle. "That's you," he said. "You found them." Aaron felt tears blur her vision. "No," she said gently. "We found each other. When night fell, she couldn't sleep. Something called her back to the creek. She followed the narrow path behind the motel until she reached the bend where the current ran deep and slow. Fireflies drifted above the surface, their reflections like tiny souls flickering in the dark. She knelt at the water's edge, the silver bowl in her lap. "It's over now," she whispered. "You can rest." The surface rippled, though no wind stirred. A faint glow shimmered beneath. Blue-white pulsing like breath. Then she heard it. A chorus of whispers, soft and distant, overlapping like rain on glass. "Remember us." Aaron swallowed hard. "I will." The glow dimmed. The water stilled. For the first time since she'd arrived in Hollow Creek. The night was silent. Days passed. The town began its slow return to routine. Crews cleared debris. Reporters moved on. And locals spoke of the tragedy in cautious past tense. Sheriff Denton resigned quietly, citing exhaustion. He left town before dawn, leaving a single note on her windshield. "You can't fix what's built on ghosts." Aaron stayed long enough to finish her report. Then she mailed her manuscript to her publisher, sealed inside a plain envelope. On the title page, she wrote, "The Vanishing of Hollow Creek, a chronicle of memory and the water that remembers." Weeks later, on a clear morning, the creek glinted like glass under the sun. Children played along its banks, their laughter echoing off the hills. One of them, a girl with a ribbon in her hair, stooped to pick up something half buried in the mud, a small brass locket. She wiped it clean and opened it. Inside was a photograph so faded it could have been anyone. A little girl with dark curls and a smile that looked almost familiar. The child looked up toward the trees. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw another figure there, a woman standing by the water watching. Then the reflection rippled, and the woman was gone. The girl pocketed the locket and ran back to her friends. Behind her, the water moved once more, a single circle spreading outward until it disappeared into stillness. Autumn returned to Hollow Creek sooner than anyone expected. The hillsides flamed gold and red, and the air took on that brittle clarity that made every sound seem closer. The creek ran clear again, its banks trimmed and neat, as if the summer's violence had been a fever dream. A new church stood half-built on the ridge. Workers hammered in measured rhythm, their shouts echoing down the valley. To anyone passing through, it looked like recovery. Proof that the town had survived. To Aaron Walsh, watching from the opposite hill, it looked like denial given form. She had come back only once, months after she'd left. She told herself it was for research, but she knew better. You don't walk away from a story like Hollow Creek. You circle back to make sure it's finished. She parked near the edge of the old road and walked the last stretch on foot, her coat snapping in the wind. The air smelled of sawdust and river moss. She carried no notebook this time, no recorder, just a folded page torn from her father's journal. They knew. Below, the new steeple rose from its frame. The sound of water mingled with the steady hammering. It seemed impossible that this same ground had once opened beneath her feet, swallowing an entire church whole. At the river's bend, she knelt and touched the water. It was cold, glassy, almost kind. A small scar still marked the earth where the willow had been. The townspeople had cut it down after the flood, fearing its roots hid bones. Only a jagged stump remained, pale against the soil. She whispered, "You kept your promise." The current whispered back, soft and even. For the first time, she felt no answering voice beneath the surface. No murmur, no echo, just the quiet rush of ordinary water. She stood and looked toward the new church. The workers were finishing for the day. One of them, a teenage boy with fair hair, paused to wave. She waved back, noticing the glint of something around his neck, a small brass locket. Her breath caught. He turned away before she could call out. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. In Hollow Creek, the difference was always thin as mist. That evening, she checked into the same weathered motel on the edge of town. The sign still flickered. The wallpaper still smelled of damp pine. She poured herself a cup of coffee gone lukewarm and opened her laptop. The book, The Vanishing of Hollow Creek, had been out for a month. Critics called it hauntingly cinematic, a meditation on faith and guilt. She'd been asked to appear on talk shows to discuss the mythology of small-town America. None of them wanted the truth. They wanted ghosts they could control. She typed a single note at the end of her digital manuscript, a line for herself. If the story ever feels finished, check the water. She shut the lid, switched off the lamp, and sat in the dark, listening to rain begin again on the roof. It was gentle this time, a soft patter that soothed more than threatened. Still, she counted the seconds between thunder and flash out of habit. 2 weeks later, the first cold snap hit. Somewhere upstream, the dam gates opened to release pressure from the mountain reservoirs. For 3 days, Hollow Creek swelled, but stayed within its banks. The mayor called it a good omen. Children skated on the shallow edges where the current slowed. On the 4th night, a deputy doing patrol stopped by the new church site. The place was empty except for the half-finished altar, a coil of rope, and the sound of water moving faster than it should have. The deputy leaned over the railing to look. In the faint moonlight, he saw something pale caught against the piling. A piece of cloth, torn, floral pattern faded almost to white. By morning, it was gone. Aaron heard about it on the news. Minor erosion near Hollow Creek site. Construction delayed. She stared at the headline, a familiar chill settling in her stomach. She closed her laptop slowly. Outside, rain tapped against the motel window again. Same rhythm as before. She rose, drew back the curtain. The creek glimmered faintly in the distance. Calm, patient. Not again, she whispered. Let it rest. Lightning flashed far off over the ridge. For an instant, she thought she saw figures on the opposite bank. Children standing ankle-deep in the shallows, their outlines thin as mist. They weren't reaching this time. They were watching, waiting. She blinked. The bank was empty. Aaron turned off the light and sat on the bed, listening. The storm built slowly, steady as breathing. She felt it in her bones, the endless rhythm of the place, the pulse of memory beneath everything humans built to forget. She picked up her recorder one last time. Epilogue, she said softly. Hollow Creek remains quiet. The water runs clear, for now static filled the silence that followed. Then, just at the edge of hearing, a voice smaller than a whisper, lighter than air. Thank you for remembering. The light flickered. The rain eased. Outside, the creek rolled on, carrying away the last trace of words that had haunted a town for more than a century. And as dawn broke pale over the valley, the water looked almost innocent again,